Good to go? Okay. Here we go. Problem solved. So, yeah, so just a little technical difficulty here. So now we're back to our regularly scheduled program. And yeah, just talking about kind of these devas in the heavenly realm. So there was this person in Thailand, and they went to see what these devas were like in heaven, and they all had these kind of like Thai headdresses. I don't know if anybody's seen these photos of these devas, and they have these kind of like earrings, and they're very ornamented, a lot of jewelry, and they were all looking kind of very Thai, and then the person said, "So is it only Thais that come to heaven, or is it only Buddhists that are here? Like, where's everybody else?" And they said, and the deva said, "We appear to you how you want to see us." There was another funny story with the same monk. He was standing with his teacher, who was really kind of a psychic monk, and could see. His teacher knew a lot of things, and there was this lay person with his teacher and him, and all of a sudden the lay person took out some money and wanted to give it to this monk. I guess monks, they don't accept money, and in the forest tradition in Thailand. And so then his teacher said, "Do you know why you wanted to give that to him?" And the layman said, "No." And he said, "His mother's there. She told you to do it, And his mother had passed away. And this layman also had this kind of what they call the divine eye. So a lot of people in Thailand, meditation became very popular in the 1950s, and there's actually many good meditators there. And so this layman closed his eyes, and he saw this kind of deva, and he goes, "Oh yeah, there's a deva there, but she doesn't look like any other deva I've seen. She's got this ring above her head." Had this like halo. So anyways, those are just two deva stories as an aside. But, kind of get your halo polished, And so these kind of beings in these heavenly realms, they have all these different superpowers, So there's this kind of a story about how there was this one monk in Thailand as well, and he used to get visited by devas from Germany a lot. These kind of devas from Germany used to come over to Thailand to see him. And he'd be like, "How do you guys get here? Like, isn't Germany really far?" And they're just like, "It's no problem for us." They just kind of disappear one spot, I guess, and go another one. And there's always these stories about these devas. Whenever they come down to see the monks, they're extremely graceful and just extremely beautiful. So there was this story about a monk in the Canon, and he was the Buddha's cousin. His name was Nanda. And the Buddha went back to his hometown to see his family. His father had sent this person to try to convince him to come back, so he did. And a number of things happened on that visit, but one of them was his cousin Nanda was there, and the Buddha said, "Okay, Nanda, you take my bull." So his cousin had no choice because Nanda was there, and he took his bull and followed the Buddha back. And I can't remember the rest of the details of the story, but the Buddha made him a monk, and he was just about to get married. So his, he was like engaged, like gonna get married real soon, and he was married to engaged to the most beautiful girl in one of those beautiful girls in these Sakyan kingdoms. It's this extreme beauty. And so he became a monk, and he was just dissatisfied all the time. And he didn't really want to become a monk. He just kind of, he got got into it through the Buddha. And so there was this time when he wanted to disrobe. He didn't want to be a monk anymore. And the Buddha grabbed him, said, "Okay, come with me." And the Buddha kind of grabbed him by the arm. And the Buddha had this kind of the Buddha was the most kind of psychic power person there. And he disappeared with him and reappeared in this heavenly world. And in this heavenly world, there are all these kind of female devas, who are called kind of nymphs. And they're just extremely, stunningly beautiful, more beautiful than the most beautiful model in the human world. And so he says, "Okay, Nanda, who do you think is more beautiful, these nymphs or the great Sakyan beauty that you left behind?" Because he told the Buddha, he's like, "When I keep thinking about this great Sakyan beauty who said, come back to me soon, my prince, with her hair parted. And he says, who's more beautiful, these nymphs or this great Sakyam beauty? And Nanda says, these nymphs are way more beautiful. The great Sakyam beauty, I can't remember her name now, but he's like, she's like a burnt monkey with her ears cut off compared to these, devas. And so the Buddha says, okay, if you live the holy life under me, I guarantee that when you die, you'll reappear in heaven and you'll have a bunch of nymphs, you know. And so Nanda says, okay, you know. But then the funny thing was all these other monks started to make fun of him. They're like, oh, it seems Nanda's living the holy life for the sake of nymphs, you know. All these monks were making fun of him. So he became extremely embarrassed and eventually went to strive to attain arahantship. But the interesting thing is that these kind of realms directly above us, you know, they have directly above us, and then as they go higher, they resemble less and less the human world. They become more and more these kind of celestial worlds that don't have a direct correlation. So the one right above us is kind of like, almost like, it seems like there's astral aspects of our world to it. You've got kind of Mount Seneru, just kind of like, seems like an astral representation of the Himalayas. It's this huge mountain. And you've got these kind of 4 kings ruling over these 4 spheres of the earth. You know, that's the one right above us, and it goes higher and higher and higher. And each one gets less and less, resembles the human realm less and less. You know? But all these devas, all these kind of angels have these kind of amazing abilities. You know, kind of even some of the ones, they can all kind of fly. They're all kind of bodiless, you know. Some of them are kind of like snakes, like these kind of nagas that tend to appear in all cultures and have the ability to kind of transform themselves and take on any shape that they want, and tend to have a lot of kind of magical powers and these kind of things, you know. And the thing about these devas is, these kind of other beings outside of us, is that they're not always the most wise beings, you know. So they have all these kind of amazing abilities, but the thing is, they're not always correct in what they say. So there was this story in the canon about one time the Buddha went on retreat, and a number of monks ended up killing themselves. You know, they kind of got disgusted with their bodies, and there was one monk who was a former executioner. And he said, okay, anybody who wants to kill themselves, you give me your robes and bowl, and I'll cut off your head for you. You know, you die. They called him a Sattaharaka. It's kind of this kind of like hired euthanist. You know, it was kind of old school euthanasia. You know, and so he was doing this for a while, and then he went to wash his sword in the water, and he thought, like, what am I doing? You know, I went forth out of faith, but have killed so many people here, and then there was this deva that appeared, and it was walking on the water. And it said, no, you've done a really good thing. Keep killing people. You know, this kind of deva was in with the wrong crowd. You know? And so he said, okay, I'll keep killing people. He killed a lot more monks, you know, after that. And the interesting thing about these kind of devas, you know, is that, you know, they appear in a lot of different places in the canon, and there's many, many of them. You know, one of the most powerful is this, one of the most kind of ones that appears the most is this deva called a Mara. You know, kind of, Mara means death. It's kind of this devil figure. And, you know, in the same way in the Christian Bible, the devil is always appearing to kind of tempt, you know, Jesus, you know, try to get him to do stuff like, okay, Jesus, why don't you rule the world? You know, you should go and take over the world. The Mara in the Buddhist canon does the same thing. He kind of tries to convince the Buddha to, you know, give up his quest and rule the world, and, you know, and he's always coming around and trying to, you know, stop people from meditating and do all these various things, you know. And the means by which Mara does this, you know, he kind of sometimes compliments people, you know, sometimes arouses doubt in them, you know. Sometimes he tries to scare them. Sometimes he kind of jumps into their body and creates weird physical sensations. But the thing about all these things, these devas, these maras, you know, they appear, and when they talk to people, some of the people can't see them, maybe. You know? Just kind of hear this voice in their head, you know. Now, most of the time in daily life, when we hear a voice in our head, we think, this voice is mine, you know? Whatever kind of thought comes up in our head, it's kind of like, okay, this thought is true, it's real, you know, this is a real thought, you know? Especially if it's a thought about who we are, you know? I'm a person who's like this, I'm a person who's like that. There's a lot of kind of these stories in the canon where Mara comes in and says, or there's some where Mara comes in and he says, you know, this being, where is it coming from? Where does it go? You know, in other words, trying to tempt these, in particular, it's with these Arahant Bhikkhunis, and trying to tempt them into thinking about a self, thinking that they really are something, really are this personality, because then Mara has a hook. And with that hook, he can pull them this way and that. Oh, you have a self now, so here you are, you know, your self is like this, you're this type of person, you're that type of person, and he can pull them into liking, pull them into disliking, pull them into love, pull them into hatred, you know. But all these kind of things, these stories about devas, I mean, actually in Buddhist philosophy, they're actually real, you know, there are real beings who are invisible. These are places where people can go, and they have a lot of powers. There's really beings who are like this, you know. And this is important to know in our meditation practice on two levels. One is, some people actually end up seeing them when they meditate, you know, so it's important to know. These kind of beings are out there. You know, actually, there was this story Saint Ajahn was telling me one time about, he met a guy, Canadian, and this Canadian, you know, when he was really young, he started to meditate and immediately started seeing these beings. But he was from a Christian background, and he thought, okay, there's only angels, there's only devils, and I don't know what these are, so they're devils. And he stopped meditating. You know? But I mean, some people can't help it. They just kind of see these things. And so then later he met this teacher, and who was able to kind of guide him. So that's one reason these things are important to know about. The other reason they're important to know about is because we have all these thoughts coming into our head, and in the Buddhist philosophy, in the teaching on meditation, not all these thoughts are necessarily ours, you know? Not all these thoughts are necessarily coming from our own volitional formations, from our own habit patterns. Some of these things could be beings outside of ourselves, kind of whispering in our ear, saying something, you know, on a different frequency, and it just shows up in our head. And then the tricky thing is, if something shows up in our head, we think it's ours, we don't know if this being is saying something wise to us or something unwise, you know? It's kind of thought about who we are, what we should do, how we should act. Just because it shows up in our head doesn't mean it's ours, you know? Doesn't mean it's true. And so we learn to approach these kind of thoughts that show up in our head in our meditation practice the same way we would approach if one of these kind of devas showed up. And kind of like, okay, this is the secret to the universe. Okay, thank you. Is this good advice or bad advice? You know? So actually the founder of the Thai forest tradition, his name was Long Pu Mun. And he was another monk who was very psychic. And when he was walking back and forth, devas would sometimes appear to him and tell him things. And what he learned was, or what is, you know, the advice that came through is, okay, always evaluate what they say. So one would show up to him and be like, look, you shouldn't look around so much when you're meditating. You know, you're kind of walking meditation, you should stay looking at the ground. Don't go looking all over the place. And he's like, okay. You know, that's kind of reasonable advice, you know? But other advice it might give him might not be something to take on. Kind of these are beings with their own agendas to them, you know, their own ideas, you know? Might not necessarily always be totally accurate idea, you know, totally accurate agenda, you know? And so important to evaluate, you know? And so there's this story about these people in the Amazonian jungle, you know, they take this kind of ayahuasca or whatever it is. And there was a Westerner who went there, and he took this kind of ayahuasca. And, you know, after he took it, he went up to this kind of like celestial plane, and there was all these beings, you know, around him, and they grabbed him up and they took him on a tour, you know, of the cosmos, and they showed him all these different things in the cosmos. And then finally he started to come back down, I guess, through whatever means, and he saw the shaman who had giving him this ayahuasca, and he's like, oh my gosh, this amazing thing happened, you know? These beings took me on this tour of the cosmos, and they revealed the secrets of the universe to me. And then the shaman goes, yeah, they say that to everybody. There was this kind of shaman, you know, they had the kind of wisdom, you know. It's because you go all around the cosmos, you know. Still worthwhile to evaluate, you know, whether or not these kind of things are true, whether or not they're false, you know. And so there is a kind of standard criterion by which we evaluate whether or not the thoughts that come into our head, whether or not we hear some celestial voice, whatever it is, there's a standard and criterion which we use to evaluate them by. And that standard and criterion is the Dhamma. It's the Buddha's teachings, you know. So this is why meditation practice isn't something that just starts and ends with sitting down and watching your breath. That's a technique that can get us some calm. But to really get our meditation practice going, it's something that works in a sort of feedback loop, you know. The kind of thoughts that come into our head, the actions that we take, all these things feed back into the way that our mind works when we sit down and close our eyes, into our ability to focus in on our breath, into our ability to spread metta, you know? So that means what we have to do is learn whether or not a thought, whether or not an external heavenly voice is worth following or not. And this is why we have the kind of Buddha as our refuge, the Dhamma as our refuge, the Sangha as our refuge, you know? So actually, you know, right now, a lot of times in meditation kind of, it's amazing, actually, as a monk just walking around, people will come up to you and be like, I've been meditating, you know? And it's like, okay, great. And they're like, I went outside of my body and was looking in my room. I've actually heard that like 3 times from 3 separate people. And, you know, maybe total over the 2 years I've been here, I've been approached by people randomly on the street to talk about meditation, you know, maybe like 6, 7 times. So that's like half the times. People come up to you and talk to you about this kind of like astral travel experience they've had, you know? And then when you say, look, you know, that's not that important, they kind of get offended. You kind of want this kind of like really special, like amazing experience where you're traveling around and like looking in your room and, you know, you're not in your body anymore. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, what wholesome qualities did you develop? You know, what ones didn't you develop? And, you know, you might have just been imagining that. Like, did you go down and see something on TV and it was actually that way? You could go confirm it later, you know? So I tended to get a little bit suspicious. Some of them might actually have had that happen, you know? And then oftentimes you'll hear about these kind of some meditation groups, and the purpose of the meditation group is to like receive signals from the outside world. You know, kind of this, getting these signals and these messages is really important, you know? And okay, you know, maybe you do get a signal or a message from some outside being or whatever it is, but then the point is, like, are they giving us good advice or bad advice, you know? Are we getting advice on how to move forward in wholesome qualities, or are we getting advice like, go look for buried treasure under X, Y, you know, X, Y, and Z, you know? Or are we getting like some weird story about something that happened in the past, you know? Because at the end of the day, all these things are actually not that important, you know? So this same teacher same teacher now, he's a teacher, his teacher when he was a student was very psychic. And he got the sense when he was living with him that his teacher could read his mind, eventually. Which you can imagine would be kind of like unnerving, right? Like everything you think, this person knows about it. You know, like you can't, I mean, people think all kinds, you know, you can think anything, right? And you know, his teacher knows about this. And then he came to know as well, this teacher seemed to be able to tell like future events, some future events. He had a sense of them. And so he was kind of going around just thinking in his head, oh my gosh, he knows all this stuff. How does he know it? What does he know? You know, how can he do this? And then his teacher came up to him and he said, you know, the important thing in our practice is purity of heart. You know, all the rest of it is really just games, you know? So in other words, you get psychic powers and you go up to, I mean, you know, some people have these things. It's not to dismiss them and say it's terrible, but you get psychic powers and you go up to a heavenly world. I mean, what do we gain out of that? You know? You get some message from another world. I mean, what do we get? What do we gain out of that? What's its relevance? You know, we go outside of our bodies and we, fly around for a bit, and what do we gain out of it? Where is it really leading us? What's the point? Or we have some kind of, kundalini energy kind of shoot up our spine to our head. Okay, like what's that for? In other words, there's a very simple and down-to-earth purpose for our practice. It's not the end purpose. The end purpose is nibbana. But moving forward in our meditation practice isn't something we look for in extremely special events. It's something we look for in the development of good, wholesome qualities in our mind. Something we look for in the development of increased goodwill. Do we get less angry? It's something we look for in the development of increased mindfulness. Are we able to stay in the present moment more and more consistently? It's something we look for in the decrease of greed. Before we used to get obsessed with wanting to eat the chips, do whatever. Now can we stop doing that? Can we gradually reduce that? And this is actually something that's more miraculous because in a sense, not, the Buddha, there is a sutta where the Buddha talks about these different types of miracles, But this is something that's actually quite important because the purpose that we might want to fly out of our body or receive heavenly messages, the purpose behind all these things is to try to find a sense of happiness, Try to find a sense of peace, And what really leads to happiness, what really leads to peace, is just this. It's the development of wholesome qualities, the reduction of unwholesome qualities, and the purifying of the mind. And this is why the Dhamma is said to be opanayako. We chant that, leading onwards. Pachatang veditabo, to be experienced by the wise, each for themselves. Because we can know for ourselves very directly, I've got these flaws. I've got these good qualities. I've got these bad qualities. And we can know for ourselves very directly, are my good qualities increasing? Are my bad qualities increasing? It can really be just that simple, Because this is the point of having a meditation practice. This is the point of going to the temple. This is one of the points of developing in Buddhist practice, is to see these good qualities increase. Because it's just these good qualities that lead to this feeling of ease and peace in our mind, wherever we are. They're the things that brighten our mind. And they're the things that serve as a basis for the actual attainments in Buddhism that don't come necessarily from having the ability to travel to the moon and back. They come from having the discernment, having this ability to see and to pierce and to see where is it my defilements come from, Why is it that I'm getting attached? And the most miraculous thing is that these things can be permanently cut so that they never arise again. And that's why the Buddha says, there are these different kinds of miracles. There's the miracle of psychic powers. The miracle of being able to fly to heaven, of hearing voices from the devas, being able to actually fly, levitate, do all these things. There's the miracle of mind reading, being able to read other people's minds. And there's also the miracle of instruction. The miracle of instruction is the one where the Buddha tells us, this is wholesome, this is unwholesome. This is to be developed. This is to be abandoned. And when a person following that path develops the wholesome, abandons the unwholesome, and develops discernment, they can find a permanent end to their defilements. They can start to tread on a path towards a happiness that doesn't change. And that's the highest miracle of all. And that's the point of our practice as Buddhists. Or as meditation practitioners at all. Okay? So I think I'll leave that for your reflection. Does anybody have any questions tonight?
I was just wondering, do most people who attain paramoksha ever, do they all gain psychic powers or don't?
There's in Thailand, it seems like a lot of them do, but there's some who, I think basically all of them do, but not all the same types. But in the canon, there's some people who don't.
Yeah, because my understanding is they don't necessarily, I don't think they're trying to get those abilities, right? It's just something that happens. happens, I guess, as you develop your meditation? Or?
Yeah, I think it could come in two ways. Like some people, it just comes as their character. Like they have that kind of character. Other people, they actively want it and they develop it, which is in the canon too.
Like there's specific techniques of stuff you can do?
Yeah. And they're based on levels of concentration, like the fourth jhana. And then the Buddha, I mean, he even describes that, if you want that, you can get it. If you have a proper opening doing X, Y, and Z, But Thailand, the culture there is very, it's different than Western culture. It's very kind of, like Western culture is a pretty like head-based intellectual culture. And they have a very kind of heart-based culture. So then most of the monks there have a very good like samadhi, like samatha practice.
So you think it's harder in our culture to probably achieve that?
The number of Westerners who develop psychic powers, at least in Buddhism, seem to be like really few compared to the Thai monks. And we were talking about, I asked the Ajahn one time, like, why is that? And other people too. And he thinks it's because of our education system. So like when people are really young, they basically get taught that there's no such thing outside of the kind of material world. And then you cut yourself off from that for a long time. And you get taught that all these various things are impossible. So then people develop a cognitive dissonance around it. And, in order to become sensitive to those things, you can't have that in place. So, they did this kind of experiment with the scientists one time at Oxford, where they said, okay, we're going to levitate this flower pot. All of you guys say this spiritual sound of Om, And so they got like all these really well-known scientists at Oxford to come into this hall. And they all started chanting Om, Om, Om. And there was this flower pot on this kind of pedestal. And as they chanted, this flower pot levitated, And then after a while, it kind of went back down. And so then all the scientists left. They video recorded all that. And all the scientists left the hall. And they were asked after they left, so what did you guys think about the levitating flower pot? And they're like, the flower pot didn't levitate. But it did. And the reason it levitated was because there was an electromagnet underneath the table. And they turned it on, and they were chanting Om, so they couldn't hear the sound of the magnet. But it was actually an experiment on the scientists. Because they're like, they're trained observers, right? But being trained observers, there's still this black space in their awareness, because this whole time their education is being, these things are possible, these things are not possible. Even though this flower pot levitated right in front of their eyes. So that's why I think this Ajahn, this kind of education that goes on for like 30 years, very intense educational experience. From the time we're like 4 to the time we're, in our 20s oftentimes. We're in an education system, and I think he feels like that's an influencing factor.
That makes sense too.
Yeah.
Because I have like certain skepticisms about those things too myself, because I think because of my upbringing.
Yeah, part of the culture, so, yeah.